The first test for Arkansas Works will be the easiest, but not painless. We'll preview the special session. The governor's plan for health savings, not everyone is happy. Judicial selection, whatever the merits of change, is there enough support? And Arkansas, the South, and a changing society. Arkansas Week next.
Arkansas Week is made possible in part by the Arkansas Times, keeping you informed by covering people, events, and politics in Arkansas. By FM 89, KUAR in Little Rock, with in-depth news reporting, analysis, and discussion each weekday.
This is Arkansas Week.
Hello again, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us. We are at the edge of a legislative session, a special session, the first of 3 in the coming weeks. And that's where we'll begin. Michael Hiblin joins us from KUAR, Public Radio for Central Arkansas. Rob Moritz, professor of journalism at UCA, Ernie Dumas, an independent journalist based in Little Rock. Thanks to everybody for coming in. Michael, you had a busy week. You practically took your mail at the state capitol. So let's start. Legislature convenes in the first of 2 sessions, the first of 3 sessions to come in, as I said, coming months.
Yeah, in this first one, we'll focus a special session focused first off on whether or not to continue the state's Medicaid expansion plan, and the governor also wants the legislature to consider his managed care proposal. Those are the only 2 items that he is putting on the call for this session. State lawmakers want him to include a competing proposal to the managed care proposal, what they're calling diamond care, which would limit the growth of Medicaid without using managed care companies, except for dental benefits. What the governor is wanting is for this managed care program to shift some traditional Medicaid services to private firms, to cut the part of it, he said on Wednesday, would cut the waiting list for people who are developmentally disabled. We've got about 3,000 who have been on a waiting list. 100 and some odd have been on for about 9 years. And the governor is suggesting that could put the state at risk for legal action. He said the savings by his managed care plan would allow them to cut the number of people on that waiting list in half in the next 3 years. There's some skepticism about whether or not that's possible. But the real fight here is whether or not it will be limited to these 2 items going into this special session. The governor has been adamant that he can set the agenda here for this. Lawmakers say that by, I believe it's a 2/3 vote, they can opt to, after those 2 items, consider other matters and can extend the special session up to 15 days. The governor's office disagrees. And if there is some dispute about that, that matter would be decided by the Senate Rules Committee. So a lot of things up in the air heading into this, but the governor has really been trying to build support for these 2 items, and exactly how this plays out still unclear.
Well, let's start with the first one, and that's the extension of the expansion, restyled as Arkansas Works. That'll be the easier of the 2 objectives anyway, in terms of the Medicaid expansion, because he doesn't need we're not talking about an appropriation here, simply a reauthorization.
Right. This would continue that with some changes, and the governor rebranding it Arkansas Works. But he's made the case, and it does seem to be resonating somewhat, that this would put a $100 million hole in the state budget, and you'd see widespread cuts. But this managed care proposal really is what has been contentious at the Capitol. But it does seem there is support. About a 250,000 Arkansans now covered through what's now known as the private option, what was created as this compromise expansion by Governor Beebe, but passed by very narrow margins. And it does seem that there is support for continuing that. But even that's up in the air.
Well, does the latter threaten the former? Does the managed care issue in some way, could that make more contentious simply the passage, Ernie, of?
Well, I think it probably could. I don't know what the dynamics are out there, but this session, the one that starts this coming week, and of course the fiscal session that starts, I guess, a week later or a week or 10 days later, going to be major tests of Asa Hutchinson's skill as governor. We'll see whether he has the skills that Mike Beebe did in dealing with a legislature that's not entirely in sync with him. We'll see whether he can get the job done, because it's critical to his whole administration, these two sessions. And I think he has some problems in this first session because I think he's going to be able to pass the Arkansas Works thing. He just needs a simple majority to simply reauthorize with some changes, reauthorize the act that they passed in 2013. So that's going to be, I think, he can get that done. I mean, there'll be some contentiousness about it, but he'll get that done. But the other issue, which is the managed care, and he's let it be known that the call for the session will be very specific, to pass his Arkansas Works and to pass his Managed Care Act. But and there's some disagreement there. The legislators said, well, you really can't, and I think they're right about it. He can limit the subject matters of the call, but I don't think that he can just narrowly describe a bill and say this is the only bill you can, because they couldn't amend it. So they could amend the bill and replace the whole thing with the Diamond Care bill,
and still remain within the purview.
I think that's what ultimately the courts would hold, but ultimately it'll be up to the rules committees of the House and Senate to decide that issue. But anyway, but even at that's a difficult problem, because he's making a lot of legislators mad, and a lot of them are his supporters. Most of them are Republicans that are on the other side of this issue. Managed care is a controversial issue. Basically, he's going to manage care, so he wants to force down the cost. But actually what that means is reduced benefits, reduced payments to providers, whether it's the hospitals and doctors and pharmacists, so there'll be reduced payments. And of course, the provider industry is not so happy about managed care.
Powerful interest
there, and
emotional.
There are, and so there's some big financial interests. The managed care industry, Centene, everybody thinks that they'll probably get the contracts. So there are a lot of powerful interests involved here, and he's got to navigate that without irritating too many legislators that could damage him in these Arkansas Works, and then particularly in the following session, the fiscal session, where he has to pass the reauthorization of the care to actually fund Arkansas Works, and that's going to be the critical vote for his whole administration and the state.
Much speculation as to whether the Democratic minority anyway, in both chambers anyway, are feeling a bit neglected, that their issues aren't, they don't have the governor's ear to the extent that perhaps they merit.
Well, I think they do feel neglected, and I think there's going to be a lot of posturing on their part. But I think the Democrats will probably end up supporting the private option Arkansas Works. But I do think that it's been a year. Governor's been in office, and I do think they don't feel like they're getting the same time fair play as the majority party.
Kind of the mention they miss.
Yes.
Yeah. It's the Democrats in both the House and Senate that have delivered for him on the central part of his program, which is the continuation of the Medicaid expansion. And the Democrats delivered it because the Republicans couldn't. They're divided down the middle on that. So he's relied on Democrats to really kind of carry out his program, and obviously they would feel, and they're not going to get a lot of benefits, I suspect, as far as appointments or anything else out of this governor in this administration. That's not the way it works.
No, but at the same time, how could they possibly go against it?
Right, they can't.
And the governor's really worked to tie these two together. I think he feels the momentum for the continuing the Medicaid expansion. But as he described it at hearing of the Medicaid Advisory Council on Wednesday, he said these two bills go together like pieces of a puzzle. You shouldn't separate them, that they're perfectly designed to coexist. And he also is making the case against the Diamond Care proposal, saying it would increase the risk to the state for cost overruns if you don't transfer, these people over to managed care organizations. The state is more at risk.
Well, he also got a bit of support this past week, not surprisingly, I should say, from the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences, which warned that its chancellor warned that absent the administration's formula, the hole at UAMS could be rather deeper than was projected. It runs at a deficit anyway because it does so much with indigent care.
Yeah, it's true. Hospitals all across Arkansas are going to suffer if this doesn't pass, but particularly the University of Arkansas, UAMS, is going to be in a deep hole. They're already struggling because they've had to make major cuts owing to the passage of the private option and the benefits they got out of that. So their budgets otherwise have been cut. So, but if they lose that as well, they're going to really be in bad shape. I forgot what the numbers are, but maybe $100 million or something. They're going to have to huge cuts in services and all kinds of programs at UAMS will be cut if that fails. So, and the governor got that additional leverage with legislators, but a lot of them don't care.
Right.
I think the word is, I don't know whether it's changed, that there are 10 solid votes in the Senate out of 35, 10 solid votes against reauthorization or against reappropriating the money again for the Medicaid expansion. And that's, they only need 9 to block it. So, you've got a small minority controls appropriation issues, at least as far as the way that the state has been interpreting the Constitution, to require a 3/4 vote for any spending other than Confederate pensions, education, highways, and just debts to the state.
Another issue out at the Capitol, and that's the matter of judicial, certainly selection at the appellate level anyway. And we had the we had legislative hearings this past week, Michael, on some possible alternatives to the existing system, particularly as it involves financing of selection.
Yeah, for judicial races.
Yes.
Yeah, there was a hearing the Senate Judiciary Committee held on Wednesday where it considered the impact of dark money in the races. We had a record amount spent by outside groups on the 2 races that were decided in March. And there was the talk, do we need to shift to a merit system rather than have these races considered by popular election? And you had a lot of justices testify about this. There is one bill being drafted, or it's already prepared, Representative Clark Tucker, that would require maybe more disclosure of groups. I believe if they spend $1,000 or more on one particular candidate, focusing on one particular candidate, that would require disclosure of the donors. There are opponents to that who say that that would then lead to harassment against those people, and that would just discourage people from supporting people or causes that are important to them. But it didn't seem to gain, there was no clear consensus in this. You had just a whole lot of back and forth that went on for hours of discussion, and at this point it doesn't seem like any action is likely. This could have been maybe an item that could be tacked on in the fiscal session if they wanted to try to do something, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen without this consensus. You also then on Thursday had the Arkansas Supreme Court say that we're going to form a committee to study this. And I don't know exactly what that would entail, but you have several justices, Karen Baker, Courtney Goodson, Joe Hart, Rhonda Wood, and Robin Wynn, who will be looking at this, but I don't know exactly where that would go.
Kind of an extraordinary development there.
Well,
Right?
it was strange, but there have been a lot of strange developments at the Supreme Court in the last couple of years. this was a particularly strange because it was 5 justices named themselves as a committee to study this issue and come up with some ideas, or I don't know what they're going to do, but notably the retiring justices, Justice Paul Danielson, issued a little statement saying, no comment, which was also strange in itself. And of course, the acting Chief Justice, that he strongly disagrees with what they're doing. And of course, the Chief Justice appointed by Governor Hutchinson recused as well. I mean, at least he's not signed on to this. He's not part of this committee. So who knows where that will go? But I think you're right. There's nothing's going to happen on that. Certainly not in the upcoming legislative session, special session next week. If it were to come about, it would probably be in the special session reserved after the fiscal session that's supposed to be for highways. It could be the governor, if he chose, could expand that. And the governor supports some kind of merit selection system, but they could do something in that session. But I think it's probably not likely this year. The one thing that's on the dark money thing, that's not likely to happen either in the special session. But there is a constitutional amendment that was filed last week by a group, or I'm not sure who's behind it, but David Couch is a lawyer, and filed a massive constitutional amendment to regulate disclosure and ethics in campaign finance, and it would outlaw dark money without disclosure. You would be required to tail disclosure and all kind of controls over this. And if they can get that on the ballot, then they have to get it past Leslie Rutledge, which is a pretty daunting task to get that on the ballot this fall. So that's a possibility that you could get that issue on the ballot, not merit selection of judges, but simply disclosure of these kind of dark money.
If you got it there, and if say you got it approved at in a referendum or by popular vote, would that still not be a challenge to it? Would seem to be almost inevitable anyway, in terms of the regulation of dollars and speech.
I'm not sure,
speech.
Because the Citizens United decision and the progeny of decisions after that seemed to. I don't think they said you couldn't require disclosure. So I think that's I'm sure that'll be an issue. I mean, if it passes, I'm sure there'll be a lawsuit over it to decide it. But the court has not. The U.S. Supreme Court has not said you can't require disclosure.
All right. Speaking of General Rutledge, she announced on Wednesday, I think, this past week, that she would appeal a circuit judge's decision, Rob, in Fayetteville, that city having enacted at the poll by popular vote an anti-discrimination code, which went farther, according to some, than state law permitted. The circuit judge held, no, it doesn't. There are other parts of the state. This ordinance is valid. Now there's going to be an appeal.
Right. The opponents of the ordinance, which was passed last year by the Fayetteville City Council, argue that it violates the state law, which was approved, I guess, last year as well by the legislature. But the judge ruled that
I said popular vote, didn't I? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Right. The judge ruled that the Fayetteville ordinance does not violate state law because it doesn't conflict with what the state law violates. So that's going to be going to the Supreme Court. And it's interesting that there seems to be a wave of these types of state laws which are being challenged. And in other states, companies, businesses are saying that if the state moves forward with these, they'll pull out business. Even in North Carolina, the NFL has said that they would be concerned and might, steer people clear of North Carolina, because in North Carolina, the governor signed it into law, but the Attorney General says it can't be enforced. In Georgia, the Georgia governor did eventually come around and veto it because he had the NFL as well as Disney saying that it would be bad for the economy.
Yeah, we don't mean to be unnecessarily vague. All of these things have to do with either sexual orientation,
Right.
LGBT, or gender identity or identification. Mississippi, Georgia, North Carolina, Virginia, Texas, South Carolina, I think. Now, the notable exceptions would appear to be North Dakota and Indiana, kind of outside the southeastern quadrant of the United States, but by and large, all of these challenges, all this legislation is coming from the South.
Yeah.
Coming to terms with a changing national sensibility, anyway, towards sexual identity, gender identification.
Yeah, and it's interesting that Attorney General Rutledge wants this to go to the Arkansas Supreme Court, said it should go there rather than the Court of Appeals because it has to do with the Constitution of the state. But it does reflect changing values and resistance to that in the South.
All of this is a reaction to the series of decisions, both in Arkansas and nationally, on sexual orientation and so forth. Ending with the gay marriage decision. When was that? 2014. 2014.
So, yeah.
So this is the fallout from that, and typically in southern states, the same way after the Brown decision many years ago, it's the same kind of pattern. You'll have, for some years, these kinds of efforts by local governments and state governments to try to roll back the clock and reinstate some kind of preference for heterosexuality and so forth. So that's we're going to see that for the next couple of years, and they're all going to go down to defeat eventually, and so it'll take another 10, 15 years, I guess, to get past this stage.
Actually, we would, the region anyway, take it on a state-by-state basis, would appear to be offering a counter-resistance that perhaps we did not see during the Brown era, or in that era right after Brown. We have the Attorney General of North Carolina absolutely refusing to defend the state's position on legislation that was deemed discriminatory. You had the governor of Georgia this past Monday veto a bill that 5 years earlier, 10 years earlier, would have been impossible. But business interest, as in Indiana, as in Arkansas earlier last year, made clear that it would prefer a broader anti-discrimination policy and brought that pressure to bear.
Right. I think Walmart was one of those businesses
Indeed,
that was
yes.
involved in that, but the legislature still moved towards it. And I think that Ernie's right. This is just a reaction to a series of rulings across the country and by the Supreme Court on social issues that many in the South are still trying to resist. So, eventually, I guess all these would somehow end up before the U.S. Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court would have to make a final decision on that, just like the gay marriage ruling of a couple of years ago.
You mentioned, Steve, that unlike the Brown era in the 50s and early 60s, that you have here and there around the South public figures like the Attorney General of North Carolina who refuses to defend these kinds of statutes. And I think it's safe to say that before the election of 2014, that would have been the situation in Arkansas. The Attorney General of Arkansas, Dustin McDaniel, at that time, let it be known that he would not defend these kinds of statutes and would not appeal. He obviously would have been going the opposite direction from Leslie Rutledge. But now we have a Republican administration through and through in Arkansas, so you've got that kind of resistance.
Well, we've got a couple of minutes left, and we haven't mentioned national politics a single time, or politics, elected politics anyway, a single time. We got Tuesday's primary day, Wisconsin.
Right. And the polls right now indicate that Ted Cruz is in the lead and Donald Trump is actually falling, according to comparing those polls to ones over the last few months. And some are looking at what happens as Wisconsin as being kind of as the impetus for whatever the Republicans want to do in the convention over the summer. And Donald Trump is again making statements that on the abortion, where he suggested that maybe there should be some punishment against women who have abortions. Both sides. I mean, when you can make both sides of that issue be on the same page, and they both came out against Donald Trump, he had to backtrack on that. And then, just as the president, and they're having a big nuclear arms discussion here, he comes out, Donald Trump, and says that he would have no real problem with more countries having nuclear weapons. So he's starting to really concern people, and I think the more and more and the closer we get to the convention, I think there will be an attempt to try to, even if Trump is leading in delegates, I think there'll be an attempt to bring Cruz, make him the nominee.
Interesting, too, a few seconds remaining. Ernie, it would appear that the Clinton people have shifted their campaign away from Wisconsin and over to New York.
Yes, I think they expect to lose Wisconsin to Bernie Sanders, and they're shifting to New York, where she must win New York. I mean, she can still get the nomination without winning New York, but it will be a blow if she doesn't carry the state that she served as a U.S. Senator. So she, just for sheer pride, she has to carry New York. But I think from here on, starting last week, the rest of the way is not going to be a very great period for either the front runners, Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton. Bernie Sanders is going to carry a lot of states, all those western states. Not many delegates out there, but he's going to carry those. He's going to do well in New York. He's going to do well in California. And all. So it's not going to be a cakewalk for her all the way, rest of the way through. And the same in the Republican side. Cruz is going to do well in all those western states. He's probably going to carry most of them. Maybe not California. So I'm thinking now it's probably likely that Donald Trump does not get to the convention with the threshold number of delegates to get the nomination, and it will be interesting to see whether they'll have to choose in between Donald Trump and Ted Cruz, and not many delegates, not many Republicans who are running things want to see either one of those candidates as their nominee. So
I'm telling you, they ought to seal off that convention hall and make it pay-per-view. They'd make a bunch of it.
Yes, it would.
Thanks, guys, for coming in. Thanks to you for watching. As always, see you next week.
Arkansas Week is made possible in part by the Arkansas Times, keeping you informed by covering people, events, and politics in Arkansas. By FM 89, KUAR in Little Rock, with in-depth news reporting, analysis, and discussion each weekday.